Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to another very special edition of Conversations with Authors through Book Passage. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. As a reader, as a book professional, I love this series. Authors having conversations about their writings, about literature in general, but I'm especially excited about today because I get to host two of my favorite people. One is including Anita Gail Jones, who's going to serve as our moderator. And I've known Anita for a few years now. She's part of the Well-Read Black Girl Book Club that we're in together. And she's just a force in that book club. And I've known her for a little bit now, and also someone that I've recently met, A.J. Verdelle, our author, featured author, and had the honor of actually interviewing her recently. I immediately felt a special connection with A.J. because of her warm personality and her extreme talent, and I think you will too. Toni Morrison, born Chloe A. Wofford, was and is a towering figure in the world of literature. And when she entered our featured author A.J. Verdelle's life, their literary friendship was a young writer's dream, simultaneously exhilarating, intimidating, fulfilling, and challenging, as you would expect. The relationship crossed generations, spanned several cycles in life. And in her featured book, which is behind me, Miss Chloe, she has beautifully written and an engaging memoir about their friendship, their writing process and journeys, as well as weaved in very deftly is A.J.'s life and how literature and her family and how Toni Morrison impacted her. A.J. Verdelle is an award-winning novelist and essayist. Her first novel, The Good Negress, garnered much acclaim and is one of my all-time favorites. She is a working mom teaching at both Lesley University and Morgan State University, and I believe she's joining us from out east in the Washington, D.C. area. Kind of taking things over and moderating, graciously accepted by Anita Gail Jones. She is a visual artist, a Bay Area resident and writer, born and raised in Albany, Georgia. In the early 90s, writing and illustrating children's stories led Anita to oral tradition of storytelling and working in the San Francisco Bay Area schools as an artist in residence. She joins us now, and next year, this time, I'm very confident we will be hosting her as the featured author, as she will be having her novel, The Peach Seed, will be released by Henry Holt Publishers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Anita and A.J. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And thank you, Book Passage, for this auspicious opportunity and for bringing the book life to San Francisco Bay Area and beyond for 46 years. We appreciate you for that. And A.J. Verdelle, your new memoir, Miss Chloe, in this book, you trampoline through breathtaking twists and somersaults of craft to land whole-footed in a spot that seemed fated from the time you lifted off. And we are awestruck. In this book, we witness brave, rambunctious, curious creativity, eponymous skills, the Verdelle 1 and the Verdelle 2, I want to call them. The literary equivalents to Simone Biles executing her triple twisting, double tucked salto backwards. Your work, and Morrison's, exceed the expectations of what can be done with 26 letters. And it is my honor and my pleasure to share this time and this space with you. Welcome, my friend.
What an amazing set of things to say. But listen, I appreciate you, and I appreciate your being an early reader of this book. I have people who are buying it, but you can tell when you talk to them that they actually haven't gotten around to reading it yet. So I'm excited to talk to somebody who's taken the time to read the book. I appreciate you for that.
Yes, yes, definitely. Well, we're going to jump into hearing you read from the book. But first, I just want you to tell us how it feels. You're 3 weeks from launch day, 3 weeks out. So how does it feel to have this book, Miss Chloe, between covers? Just tell us.
Well, you know, I was thinking about this interview earlier today, and I was thinking about the first time I interviewed Toni Morrison, which I only did twice in my life, but the first time she was very sort of instructive. I had gone to the tech department at Princeton, and I had gotten a tape recorder, and they had advised me which was the best kind to take at that time and moved me toward professional equipment. And I went into her office and I set everything up. And the first thing she did was take the mic and move it from the center of the desk closer to where she would be speaking. And she was very, very businesslike and very prim. And it was before I knew her very well. And I was quite nervous, but it was an experience that started right away, which was that people would start to call me to try to get to Toni Morrison. And so the people from Duke at the Center for Documentary Studies had called me to interview her. And you talk about full circle, that's how I got to this book, because somebody from the New York Times called to try to get to Toni Morrison. They were looking for a person who knew her personally. And then after I published in the Times, Steve Ross called and said, I think you have more to say. And so I didn't think I did, but I wrote about a 100-page draft in about 3 weeks. And I thought, I do have a lot to say. And I left a lot out of this book for a number of different kinds of reasons. And so I feel surprised that I was able to get it done in the time I got it done. I feel surprised to have watched myself write kind of feverishly, you know, in a way like she was just on my mind all the time, while I was doing this. And then it's so pretty. So there are a lot of there are a lot of nice aspects of being able to write again and be in bookstores again.
That's wonderful. Yeah, it seemed that it happened really fast. I found out about it on Publishers Marketplace. I was just perusing because I was looking for an agent at that time and checking in every day. And lo and behold, this deal comes up. And I didn't even know you were writing the book. And it's like, oh my gosh, AJ's got a new book coming out. It was very exciting. And I have my very precious, you see how it's well loved already.
Yes, you have the advanced reader's copy, which is
my advanced reader's copy, which I cherish.
Yeah, those are kind of hard to come by. Yeah, but I do want to say that the experience of writing this book and writing this book quickly made me realize that I wasn't going to be able to feel the kind of grief I expected to feel. I thought that I was be writing through sadness and be writing through this idea of a future where I wasn't going to be able to talk to her anymore. And I think creating something tactile, creating something that actually exists with those memories, it made me just feel like, oh, I'm really glad I have these memories. I'm really glad. Obviously, I'm glad I had the experience, but I'm not going to be able to turn that experience into sadness. And that was something no one could have told me. That was something that only the experience could teach.
That's beautiful, beautiful. I remember you saying that each memory, as you worked on it, because I asked if you were working completely from memory, and you said each memory made room for a new memory.
That's right. That's right. It's very true. And, you know, that is true of my writing process altogether. Actually, many years ago, Wynton Marsalis talked about this, where when you go to your work, if you do everything you can to empty yourself of whatever it is that you are inspired by at the moment, what it does is it makes space for whatever is the afterthought or whatever is the next melody or whatever is the next step. And I found that very clearly with this experience, because things that I didn't remember at all would show up after the memories that I carry with me most presently were written down.
Beautiful.
So I'm going to read before we go too far from the beginning of this book, and we'll see if it takes a very short time. I think it will. So these are the very first page where I'm starting. When you open the door to Toni Morrison, you look genius in the face. She was a legend while she lived, and now that she is gone, she's a literary monument, a beacon, an ancestor, an everlasting eidolon, thriving in a weightless world. A woman and a writer who left a voluminous legacy, a woman who lived through incarnations we can only conjure. Consider, Chloe Ardelia Wofford was born colored in Lorain, Ohio in 1931. Colored was the term of the time. Colored is what her birth certificate says. Mine says Negro. Morrison was 29 when I was born. So in those 3 decades, we made our first naming transition officially from colored to lowercase Negro. More name changes have come as we stopped accepting definition solely as a racialized opposite. Toni Morrison lived a dozen years short of a century, but she researched, thought about, and reimagined all 4 centuries of our experience here in this country we call America. This little girl from Lorain made books covering all our eras. She focused on our positions under the low sky of our lives, first as colored, then, which was originally, colored was originally an emancipated moniker. Then we were Negro, then we were capital Negro, then we were Black, then we were capital Black, then we were African American, which brings us through self-definition to now. Her books about us, about people living under unseemly, outrageous, and callous conditions, managed to capture our persistence and our stamina and our aliveness, regardless of how our country left our future for dead.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I just can't wait for everybody to get this book and read it, because it has such a breezy tone. And I've known you for 10 years, so I hear your voice when I'm reading the book, and it's like a conversation with you, a very serious conversation at times, but there's a breeziness to it. And I love hearing you read. I wish we could just listen to you read it all day.
Well, thank you so much. But I think the breeziness and the beginning, as I'm reminding myself, I'm trying to prepare people that it's going to cover a lot of ground, right? That it's going to cover Morrison, and it's going to cover history, and it's going to cover America, and it's going to cover whether or not our futures are dead.
It does all of that and so much more. Okay, so unlike gymnastics with its physical limitations, literature has no limits. Words are boundless. And with Miss Chloe, you show us this with tremendous power and incredible technique. So I want to get this out of the way right at the top here, because I know we have a lot of lit geeks listening, and writers. And I want to know, tell us about your writing practice. What's it like, your process? Do you write best in the AM or the PM, sitting, standing, coffee, kombucha, or pencil, pen, or keyboard? Just take us into your practice.
Well, the most important part of my writing practice, and I think this is true for anybody, is just try to be consistent. And like I said, this book of the way I normally work, it got done with lightning speed. Normally, I'm a much slower writer, very deliberate writer, very careful revisionist. With my fiction. I did a lot of revision with this book as well, but because it's truth, because it's just based on things that actually happened, and that what I'm trying to remember is sort of when, or what was I wearing, or what was I worried about, or how did I get there? Those kinds of things. I think I was able to do it a lot faster. I think that I try to write around the time that I was born, because I read, when I studied creativity literature, I read that you should tap into that time, because that's when you expend the most energy of all your life, is trying to get born. And so if you have a surge of creativity, often it'll happen around that time. In the past, I had trained myself to write very early in the morning. And so I still do wake up and try some writing, but this book mostly got done sort of all day long in a real sense of pandemic pressure kind of thing.
And the rest of your life. You were still doing everything else in the process of writing this book. So
that's right. And quite honestly, now that the book is published and there are kind of publishing demands, those are actually harder. So, you know, as a person who really identifies as a writer and who values writing, even though it takes a lot of work and it makes me, you know, I had a lot of trepidation about trying to write about Toni Morrison. I felt like, if you're going to write about Toni Morrison, you need to write your ASS on it, you know? And so I was really, really focused on the language and the carefulness of it, and really trying to identify what we shared, because a lot of why we could be friends was because of, just like the passage I read you, where, you know, I noticed that her birth certificate says colored. I noticed that mine has the lowercase n. I can attach that to our names across the centuries. Those were the kinds of language connections that she trafficked in and that she valued and that her conversations were based on. And so you have to have a sort of shared experience or a shared sense of history in order to sort of keep up with her and interest her.
When I said brave, I meant brave. I mean, but you're right. We were talking about that earlier, how you had to write your fill in the blank off, and you did. It's everything that we would expect it to be, having lived the life you lived, experienced the things you experienced with her, without her, just the trajectory of your life. This is the book that would be there because, well, you're AJ Verdelle. And from the time that we met nearly 10 years ago, and yes, crazy that it's been that long, I have been in awe of how numbers and letters coexist in the AJ Verdelle brain. So would you talk about how the relationship between your statistician and your writer, you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, okay, so for the record, I dreamed of being a writer as a young person. Part of what I talk about in Miss Chloe was how I was young. I was a young kid reading Toni Morrison's books as they were coming out. And I was also reading James Baldwin, and I was reading Maya Angelou. I was reading all these people that sort of showed up on my mother's shelves, and then I would chase more of their work down in the library. And basically, I wanted to know, where is the geography? Where is the place that people are using these words that I'm reading? Because it's not happening where I live, where I go to school. The words that I'm encountering in the books are not the same words that I'm hearing on a daily basis. So already I had it in my mind that part of my future would be encountering some other world where this language, which was supposed to be my language, was actually being spoken, right? So that was sort of my word love. That's how I befriended dictionaries. That's how I became a person who cared about language and saw what language could do, which Toni Morrison bluntly referred to as power. Toni Morrison believed that language was power. Well, I'm dreaming of this, and to my family, that was like, you want to be a writer? That's like saying you want to be an artist. That's like saying you want to be broke. That's like saying you want to starve. That's like saying you're going to die. And so it was a fatalist approach to this dream that I had. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. But then when I went I work for the American Bar Association because the researcher in me could find those environments. And so many of the lawyers I met were saying they had novels in their desk drawers, half finished, partly finished, gonna be finished in the, and I thought, oh no, this is not a plan. Because I could see myself at 45 standing up telling some 20-year-old who's saying, I wish I could be a writer. Oh, so do I have a novel. So anyway, I decided that I was going to go into research, and I met these lovely doctoral level research statisticians at the University of Chicago, where I was in school, and I studied statistics, and that became my initial career. And so when you're a statistician, you're always counting, and you're not counting in you're counting in a sort of categorical way, right? You're always putting things into boxes. Is it history? Is it present tense? Is it gendered? Is it raced? Is it aged? What phases of life do these things apply to? And so I learned to look for numeracy in almost everything I did. So even the thing that I was describing about writing at the time that you're born is sort of a numeracy idea. So as you know, I look at numeracy in dates, and I look at palindromes, and but what it really is, Anita, is it is the idea of expanding your intellectual acrobatics, right? Because as fiction writers, we have to be able to imagine whole worlds for people, and not just the worlds that they live in, but the worlds that they're imagining, right? So you're constantly managing and morphing categories and people. And I just find that numbers help me solidify things for my characters sometimes, a date when something else was going on, or a category shift. So expanding your intellectual capability, that was also something Morrison valued very highly. And I think she was quite, she was almost religious about it. Like, how far can I take this thought that I'm having? And how relevant is it? And if it's big relevant, let me take it big far. And if it's little relevant, let me just drop it and keep moving. So she was also categorizing and morphing in ways in how she wrote and thought as well.
Yeah, well, working with you, you brought that into my world, this whole idea of numbers and the sequential dates and palindromes and all of that stuff. And of course, I traveled to DC for your 12, 13, 14 party.
Yeah, last sequential date of the century. That's
the
what that was.
Last sequential date of the century. And I just started looking for these things. And what I found with writing was it was another way in.
Right.
If I was ever stuck, I said, well, let me see what the numbers are telling me. What's that character's birthday? And what do those digits add up to? You're looking for any way in that you can find. So
that's right.
So that's just another way in. And it's a great way in.
Right.
So, having studied under you, I know firsthand the splendor and the prowess of your editing, but yeah, I know firsthand what a Verdelle 1 and a Verdelle 2 look and feel like, but how is it for you to edit yourself and then to release your babies to someone else to edit?
Well, interestingly enough, on this project, I was actually told, I cannot help you with your sentences, which was very surprising to me, but I think it's indicative of the phase of life I'm in. I mean, I think it was one of those beautiful politicians who recently passed away, maybe Elijah Cummings, or might have been Elijah Cummings, or maybe it was Mr. From South Carolina, who's kind of the leader of the party. I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, he said, I'm in the twilight of my life. I'm in the evening of my life, right? So what I'm thinking about is, at this point, I'm sort of at the cusp of wisdom years. And that's where the book begins. Do you know where your wisdom lives, right? So you know, you age, you mature. The sentence is sort of the basic unit of narrative writing. And I have worked hard to master and vary my sentences. And I've been working on that since way back when I was reading and 10, 11, 12, discovering, oh, people are doing things with language that I don't really understand, and I don't understand what. So I've been working on sentences for decades. So where the editing really comes in for me, and this is where my editor was a help, is about ideas, right? Like what things, I know what things I think are most important. You know, I know the ideas that Toni Morrison and I really relied on, right? So for instance, she understood my anxiety at Princeton, which I talk a lot about in this book. She understood when I said, these white kids have everything. You know, why am I up here giving and giving and giving to kids who already have everything, right? She was down with that. And that's sort of a shared historical experience, right? That understanding that this is a really unique, really posh, really funded, really manicured situation. And maybe I'm a square peg in this situation, you know, because posh and manicured, that my life is rough and tumble. The kids that I work with, their lives are rough and tumble, and, you know, and we're looking to make some logic and some ease out of that instead of sort of starting in this. It's almost like, it's like going to school on a golf course at Princeton.
Yeah.
So anyway, the shared historical understanding, very important and idea oriented. And so the selection of ideas was where I got the most editorial help. And you're right, I am really sort of crackerjack at editing sentences. So
Yes, you are.
I have that down.
I have a couple of questions here from the audience. Paula wants to know, how did the age difference between you and Toni Morrison inform your relationship, if at all?
Oh, well, from my perspective, it pretty much defined our relationship. I mean, that is the reason that I called her Miss Chloe, because as it started to become clear after 1 or 2 or 3 meetings that I was going to be seeing her, that she was actually going to be calling and inviting me, I had to like work out, well, how am I going to be addressing her? And I was not going to call her Toni because it just sounded too flip. I wasn't going to call her Miss Toni because I felt like it wasn't something I could say in public, like all her friends call her Toni, all the interviewers call her Toni. So for me to be standing around going Miss Toni sounded strange. I thought, should I ask her what to call her? But then I just decided, you know, I had found out her name was Chloe when I was young, when I looked her up in an encyclopedia when they used to have those things. And I love that name. I love being able to pronounce it. I thought it was sort of a postmodern kind of name. And I actually had said to her, you know, you have this very sort of now sort of avant-garde kind of name. She cracked up. She's like, it's in the Bible. I was like, oh, bust. So so it's only mentioned once in the Bible, only once.
Yeah, that's enough. Only takes
Yes,
one.
that's right. That's right. And her mother found it. And, you know, I was pleased that I could pronounce it. And I was pleased that it could be respectful, but it also could reference a time in her life that I think she skipped, which I also talk about in the book. But so the generational difference, it defined us in terms of how I felt about her, how I wanted to treat her, how much more I thought she knew than I did. And it also affected how we interacted with each other. And, you know, I was responsible for the smaller things, everything big that happened, that was on her engine, you know? So our generational difference was defining. And sometimes I really actually felt like, am I a play date to her? You know, like, is she calling me up because it's Thursday and, you know, she doesn't have a plan? But anyway, it was fine with me. I was fine.
For real, yes.
With my experience with her, for sure.
Here's another question. What are your favorite Morrison novels, and which would you recommend to those in the audience who might be new to reading her?
Okay, well, I think that Morrison's novel that is representative and easiest to read is Sula. And Sula lends itself to some of Morrison's perennial ideas, like what happens to Black people in cities, how women see themselves and extricate themselves or enmesh themselves in their families, how skin color makes a difference in terms of people's past and their futures. And also Sula covers a lot of secrets. So it's a short book, it's an engaging book. I call it Morrison's fire book. But also because there are several fires in Sula. One of them is purposefully set and one of them is an accident. And women's friendship. Sula is also about women's friendship. Song of Solomon is, of course, her breakthrough book, one of her most famous books. Obama loves Song of Solomon. I know you love Song of Solomon.
My favorite, yeah.
The Bluest Eye is her first book, and it's a really good introduction to what this person is going to be to literature. She takes on nursery rhymes in The Bluest Eye. My favorite book is Paradise. It's one of her later books, probably novel number 6 or so. But as long as you start sort of early in her career, from Song of Solomon back to Sula, back jazz is between Sula and Song of Solomon, or maybe after, I don't know. And then as long as you start sort of early, any of those will work fine.
Very good, thank you. And we're going to get into the banned book issue a little bit later, but I want to bring this question in now from Allison. Which Morrison books are banned, and why do you think they are?
Well, you know, the banned book discussion is wide ranging. It's almost sort of out of control. And I think we can expect that because there's so little logic to it. But a number of Morrison's books are banned in different locations. And the reason, what I mean when I say out of control, their reasoning is not all that clear. But Morrison did write what some reviewers call unflinchingly. So her Bluest Eye book has incest in it, and people are unhappy about children reading about incest, except incest happens to children. So I don't know why children can't know about things that potentially happen to them. But anyway, The Bluest Eye is about incest. Like I said, Sula has a lot of fires in it. There's a child death in Sula. Sula has been banned, not as frequently as The Bluest Eye. Paradise was banned by prisons before this banned book discussion started, because Paradise is about Black families, Black men building independent towns. So they didn't like that.
Oh my
So the different books are banned for different reasons. And some of the religious community doesn't like Beloved because there's a ghost at the center of the book. And you know, you can have an afterlife, you can be an angel, but you can't be a sort of a ghost on earth. So a number of her books are banned in different locations at different levels, jurisdictions, for different reasons. But the school bannings that are going on right now, most of the complaint I've heard has been about incest and drugs, both of which, as you know, happen in our society. So,
and you sent me an Instagram of our governor, Gavin Newsom, with a stack of banned books, and there he is sitting there reading Beloved. I love that post.
Yeah.
So in Miss Chloe, you bring flesh and blood qualities to libraries. And that really resonates with me because my late mom was a librarian.
Oh.
And so you fell in love with libraries long before the internet.
Right.
So talk about how this beloved system, for better or worse, was changed when Dewey Decimal met zeros and ones.
Okay, so here's the thing about libraries, and this is why libraries have such a big I think intermittent, I think it's spread out in the book, but there's a big chunk in this book on libraries. And part of that has to do with my having learned that Morrison was working in a library when she was in high school. I went to libraries, but I had my first job in a library when I was in college. And let me tell you, there was nothing I wanted more than a job in the library, because just, you know, you can learn so much just from reading titles of books if you know what you're reading, right? So I talk in my library experience in the book, Miss Chloe, I talk about discovering E185, which is the call number category where Black history is shelved, and how, because I had only been reading fiction, Baldwin, Maya Angelou didn't exactly write fiction, but she was often treated as if she was writing fiction, which is high. You know, fiction is one of the most complicated art forms. So I'm not saying it's bad to be treated like you're writing fiction. When you write fiction, there's nothing there. There's no date, there's no nothing, everything you invent. But anyway, in the library, there is an embedded categorization. The librarians for centuries have been reviewing the material and deciding if things make sense. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't get kept in the library. That is, if you write a true story and the dates are wrong, they're not going to keep your book in the library. Not every book is in the library. So the material is vetted. The material is organized. When you go to look for some one thing, the things that are related are going to be shelved around it. The internet, on the other hand, is really a free-for-all. And so I actually compare it to sticking your hand down in a barrel, right? You go to the library, you pick a book from a categorized section, it's on a certain subject, you learn about that subject, and you learn a little bit more around the subject. You go to the internet, it's like sticking your hand down in a dark barrel. You might get a pickle, you might get a snake, you know, you might get a frog, right? Because all you did was stick your hand down in a barrel. And that's what you're referencing about zeros and ones, because it's like barrel, yes, barrel, no. So the only way you don't get something you don't want is to go to barrel, no. If you go to barrel, yes, you're going to get anything that could be in a barrel. And the library takes that sort of dark, reach your hand down guesswork away. It's a very focused, organized, long-term experience that you're walking into when you walk into a library.
Go to the library, folks. Go back to libraries. Thank you for that. I have another question here from my friend Carla, who's a Bay Area writer. She asks, what are the major things you and Ms. Chloe addressed in your conversations?
So we talked about language a lot. We made language jokes that I think people who, if we had been around people, because one of the mystifying aspects of my relationship with Toni Morrison was how often it was just the two of us. In fact, once I saw her maybe a dozen times, and it was just the two of us, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to bring anybody to see Toni Morrison because, you know, she's laid the groundwork, right? I would be interrupting everything. So in the 20 years I knew her, the only other person I took to see her was my kid, because
lucky kid.
Yeah. But we talked about language, we talked about books, we talked about Black people, we talked about turns of phrase, like, you know, like I would say something about the low sky or something, or once we had a conversation about slavery, you know, and I was surprised that we were talking about that, and then I realized I was doing most of the babbling. Like we started talking about slavery and then suddenly I was doing all the talking. So I decided to shut up and I said, well, I just have to figure out how I'm going to treat it. And she paused for a while and then she said, it hurt. And so that was how a lot of our conversations went, where she would end up saying 2 words or 3 words and it would just be so profound, it would shut everything down and we'd change the subject to something else. But, you know, I just tried to follow her lead. I tried to keep up with her and you know, I don't exaggerate. I don't think when I say that if you didn't know Toni Morrison's work, you couldn't really be friends with her, because she was liable to either reference her work or look for you to reference her work at any time. And she'd written about so many things that there were always things that you could tie to the present tense.
Yeah.
So, and we talked about writing some too, not too much about the actual practice of writing. And the reason I know that is because of the imagination technique conversation that I talk about. It stands out because it was kind of rare.
Right. And you know, you guarded that friendship. AJ, can you imagine if you had been trying to bring all kinds of folks to meet Toni Morrison, how quickly you would have been off the list of invitations?
I think that's true.
I mean, when I met you and I learned that you were just casually mentioning that you knew AJ, that you knew Toni Morrison, I also then immediately knew, don't go there. Don't even say, don't do the thing that everybody she knows is doing,
Right.
because it's not going to happen. So you met Miss Chloe 10 years after James Baldwin died. And of course, she and he were friends. And in the book, you talk about meeting his sister, Gloria Baldwin.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what it could have been like if you and Toni Morrison were in the same room with James Baldwin. That's just almost too much for me to process. But let's talk about Gloria Baldwin. What's she like? What was that like?
Oh, Gloria Baldwin is so wise. She is so grounded and so, she's almost like a literary invention to me because of her storied brother and her storied way of showing up in my vision. I mean, I was at a Toni Morrison event where there were hundreds and hundreds of people, which was true of most of her public events. Even her birthday parties that people had for her, they would have 100 people at the birthday parties. So, you know, there were always these crowds, and there's this lady sitting off at the edge of the crowd, which is how I always was around Toni Morrison's crowds, because I'm not going to go up and be trying to engage when there are 800 other people, you know. But anyway, so there I am on the edge, and there's Gloria Baldwin. And I looked at her and I thought, oh my God, that's like James Baldwin in a skirt. And that's when I realized, okay, she's got to be related. So anyway, we had a lovely chat that evening. We were both on the edge of the auditorium, and she and I have kept up. She's quite aged now and isn't really out as much, but Gloria Baldwin is a treat to have known, and very, very smart. Has that same kind of brief intelligence, briefly delivered intelligence that you encounter with Morrison. So when I don't know if you know this film, I Am Not Your Negro.
Yes, very well.
Yes. Okay. So that film is based on some writing that James Baldwin didn't finish. And in that film, the night that Martin, it's either Martin or Malcolm, I think it's Martin, the night that Martin was shot, Jimmy and Gloria and some other people were in a restaurant in France. And they talk about the scene of, they go to get Gloria from the table to take a phone call that has come for Jimmy. So these sort of hierarchies around literary stars, it's all very romantic. But anyway, she goes to take the phone call at the maitre d's desk, which we don't do that anymore because we have cell phones. Right. And then she has to come back to the table and deliver this news to Jimmy. And that is really the experience you get when you're around Gloria, that she was such a sort of transmitter of active history between people who are very important. And in my case, I met her in the Toni Morrison context and gained the Baldwin context. And so she was transmitting not just for her brother, but for other people who knew and loved her.
Yes. Paul is asking, other than Baldwin, who were some of the writers and books Miss Morrison appreciated and recommended?
Well, when I knew Morrison, she was post-Nobel, and she was very much involved with reaching out to younger artists, not just writers, but artists. So she was fond of Edwidge. Edwidge was very involved in Morrison's work at the Louvre in France, which happened around 06, 07, around the foreigner's home, and that material is on film. But also she had this atelier at Princeton where she invited younger artists. So she invited Toshi Regan there to work on a project. She invited Louis Massai, who's a filmmaker from Philadelphia, there to work on a project. Richard Danielpour, who she wrote lyrics for herself, he came there. So she was doing something that was sort of more beyond literature in terms of how she reached out to artists when I knew her. We actually didn't even talk about Jimmy very much. So quite honestly, the work that we talked about the most was hers.
Yes, yes. Oh, my good friend Flora Devine is asking a question all the way from Savannah, Georgia. What do you think Toni Morrison wanted to be her legacy to America and to the world? And from your informed perspective, what would you say is actually her legacy? Those may be the same.
That's an excellent question. I think that the idea or the reality that Morrison wrote about all 400 years of our history, especially since she reached into the 1600s late in sort of novel 10 or novel 11 maybe, when she wrote A Mercy, which is set in the 1600s. I think that she wanted to cover the African-American experience. And I think she wanted to ensconce it in the most molded, plied, supple language she could create. And she was exceedingly careful with her language. So I think she was looking to build a beautiful language infrastructure around a torrential experience in the Americas. So I think that's what she sort of was aiming for. And I think she did it 100%. I think though that her legacy really, from an outsider's perspective, is the way that she was able to bring intimacy and humanity to a downtrodden population. To say, yeah, these people live in a storefront, but guess what? When you go inside there, let me tell you what's going on, right? Or you see the corn shaking in the field, let me tell you what's happening there. Or let me tell you how far this brother walked to see this woman he was in love with. Or let me tell you what happened to him when he saw her get violated. So she just went boldly into the psychological and emotional interiors of people who had been treated as kind of like just this category of detritus, just these clunks of women who were abused and men who were beat down and slaves who were murdered and kids who were terrorized. She said, no. They have names. They have clothes they like. Let me show you. So I think that she went deeply interior into a population that hadn't been treated as individuals.
Yes, and the way she would do details. The one and only time I saw Morrison live was here in San Francisco at the Masonic Theater on Saturday, November 22nd, 2008. She was on tour for A Mercy, we decided, right? A Mercy. And I'm sure there's some folk on this call that were probably there that night. And you know I took notes. And there were two things that stood out for me. And one of them was, she said, when my father died, the girl he thought I was died too. And the other one goes into what you were talking about with her details. She said, I can taste everything, in talking about her characters and going deeply, inhabiting her characters. She said, I can taste everything she tastes, know what she would wear, but I would never cut off the reader's imagination by describing it in all of it in detail. She left so much room for your 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 intelligence or your interpretations. There's room for that in her writing, and it's so amazing the way she does that.
Yeah, well, especially in fiction,
Yes.
you're very dependent on the reader's engaged imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more you tell them, the less they have to imagine. So you have to be very selective about what you want to tell them and what you can leave to the imagination. So, and Morrison, she was not just careful about it, she was also sort of judgmental about it. Like, what are the things that haven't been talked about? Or what are the things that we don't think about? So for example, when Setha is trying to escape Kentucky to get to Ohio, where she believes she's going to be free, she's walking barefoot.
Mm-hmm.
And the business of African Americans not having shoes is a big deal. And so Morrison has a whole scenario in the early part of Beloved where this white woman, one of the few benevolent white characters, but there she is, benevolent and white, she is trying to put a poultice on Setha's feet so that she can continue to walk because her feet are all swollen and blistered and she's pregnant and she has no shoes and the twigs are piercing the soles of her feet. And so the woman tries to put these spider webs and plants on her feet to sort of suck up some of the inflammation and everything. So, no one's ever written about that.
No, not the way.
So she's making a choice, right? She's like, there's all these vicissitudes. This woman is alone, trying to escape. She's about to have a baby. You could focus on any of a million things. Choose 3.
Choose 3, yes.
She chooses her 3 and leaves the rest to your imagination.
That's the beauty. So we're going to close. We've been doing these Q&A questions coming in here, but we are winding up now. And I have one final question for you, Ms. AJ. Morrison's body of work spans 45 years, from 1970, Bluest Eye, to 2015, God Help the Child. So if you were to superimpose this collection, her work, her body of work, superimpose that over a timeline of American history and culture spanning those same years, what would we see?
Okay, so the question you're asking, which is exciting, is kind of a question about living history, right? Because those 45 years, most of us have been alive. Some of us haven't been, but I believe that we are all dated to the knowledge of our parents. So you get a little boost, right, in what you know, because you're growing up around what your parents know. And if you really think about it, the music you know best is the music your parents listen to. The beginning of history that you can identify is the history that your parents talk about. So 45 years is within all of our reach, as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. So there's this history that goes over that, and I'll come back to that in one second. But I want to just go back to the personal history that you're suggesting, because Morrison is really making a sort of dichotomy in her career when she says what you quoted, which is, when my father died, the girl he thought I was died with him, or the woman he thought I was, or whatever it is. Morrison was very clear that her father was racist to the core. Now, racist is a term that really is about power. So because her father didn't have a whole lot of power, his racism didn't have a lot of effect. Mm. But he thought that white people were irredeemable. And the reason he thought that is because they lynched in the town in Mississippi that their grandparents left from. They lynched these 3 Black businessmen because they had businesses. They did not want them to have businesses. They did not want them to make money. So when Morrison's family fled that town, it was as a result of that lynching. And her father never got over that. And it's so interesting because when Morrison started work as an editor, she was working in an all-white environment. She was the one.
Yes.
When her work as an editor really changed the trajectory for Black literature, period, full stop.
Yeah.
And not everybody knows that, but it's real. And so Morrison, when she says that, it makes me think that she's saying that that kind of irredeemable, I am not going to consider this category of people, which is what racism is. I'm not going to consider Black people. I'm not going to treat them like they're right.
Mm-hmm.
Her father was like that about white people. He wouldn't let them in the house. He wouldn't let his wife answer the door when they came to the door. He didn't want to be around them, the whole thing. So this is part of what was put to bed when her father died. And from Morrison's editing career, almost all those people were white people that she was in there with and learning from and tussling with and arguing over and trying to fit all our new heroes like Henry Dumas and Man, Child in the Promised Land, Claude Brown and June Jordan and Lucille Clifton, all these people that she was working with, right? She was bringing them into a white system. So that dichotomy that she's positioning in her personal life, I think it matters a lot to her work. Now, in terms of our sort of 45-year span, that's a short number of years. She made big change and moved herself way high up in a very short number of publishing years. And in our living history, we went from, non-voting with very limited access to work. Everybody did laundry or cooked or were maids.
Yes.
Or janitors.
Mm-hmm.
You did that or you did nothing. Or you went to a Black community where you could go to Morgan or go to Howard and be a doctor or be a dentist and serve only your own people. And then that was destroyed by integration. And so we see a cyclical progress backwardness that really reflects all our 400 years in the 45 years that she was writing. And I think she really clearly recognized the sort of echoes of our history, as well as the volatility of our history that had carried forward into even still our present tense.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I see we get Paula. Paula, you're going to be back in with us.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, this is the point of the part of the program where, yes, I encourage people to buy the book and buy it from Book Passage or indie bookstores, and also where I get to gush over our featured guest today, and I'm definitely going to do that. Let me start with Anita.
Yes.
I have hosted a lot of authors doing what you did today, but man, you took it to a whole different literary level. And I'm talking A-list authors, you took it to a different level, my friend.
Well, thank you.
Good or bad, because it means you're getting enlisted.
Oh, I see what you're doing.
Yeah. And AJ, oh my gosh, just thank you for shining a light on Toni Morrison. We never get tired of hearing about Toni and her legacy, because I think a lot of us today watching, and those that'll watch in the archives, are Toni Morrison fans, or they very soon will be. And it just is so enriching to hear about her personally and what she thought about things from a literary perspective, which, we didn't get a chance to all the time when she was with us. And I love how you point out that when you were writing this, you really didn't have a chance to grieve, or you didn't go down that path. You expected to, but you didn't, because you ended up really engaging in and appreciating her life and her work.
Yeah.
And man, I think we can apply that to a lot of things. As far as personal people we know and lose, that's just so beautiful. The both of you, beautiful writing, beautiful talking, great subject.
Paula,
Thank you so
may I-
much.
may I ask you one thing, Paula?
Yeah.
Can we give AJ this very last word? She had something she wanted to say that we didn't get in there quite.
Of course.
So AJ, your last words here about what we talked about earlier in the week about trying to erase Toni.
Right.
Your last.
Yeah, the whole banned book situation is a little unnerving, not just because it's crazy, but because of how quickly Toni Morrison could actually be erased. You know, if you yank Toni Morrison out of schools and you're able to be successful at that for, say, 15 years, then that's a whole generation of people who don't know about Toni Morrison suddenly, where really Toni Morrison is venerated all over the world. And Toni Morrison's revelations about America have informed people all over the world, and her reach as a writer has inspired people all over the world. So, you know, I'm wondering if we who love Toni Morrison are going to be able to get away with just complaining about this, watching it happen and saying, aren't they crazy? Toni Morrison's so important. Toni Morrison did a lot of standing up for us with the work that she did. And we might need to get ourselves together and stand up for Toni Morrison.
Amen.
Absolutely. Wow, that's such an important point. Thank you. I guess I didn't think about that. Even, you know, I did a whole program on banned books, but to put it in that very personal, focused perspective is just astounding and very important. And I'll also say, I know we have to wrap it up here, but while I have you two here, I noticed the last time I was in New York, and you know, you go through the, what is it called? In Central Park, the Poets Walkway.
Yes.
A walkway, but I'm going blank on what it's called. I noticed there's literally, they're almost all white men, old dead white men. I do think there's a statue of Harriet Tubman, and that's about it. I would love to see us start a campaign for a statue of Toni Morrison. Right?
Right.
So
she's an ancestor now, eligible.
Yeah. And for now, though, I want to encourage Book Passage viewers and customers. This is just a beautiful book inside the writing, important story and memoir, but definitely beautiful cover. I can't encourage you enough to definitely buy this book and share it with friends and family. I think it should, you know, go side by side with your Toni Morrison collection. So we have plenty of these at Book Passage. I don't know if we have signed ones or book plates. If we don't, we will probably get book plates from AJ. I do know that we do have some first editions. So once we get those book plates, you'll have a signed first edition of what I think is an important book and one of the best memoirs of 2022. Thank you to both of you for being on our virtual stage. Continue to promote your literature and Toni, and just be safe and wonderful as you are.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, AJ.
Thank you.
Thank you.